This talk is about how to transition from being a developer to being more security conscious or thinking like an attacker. So who am I? My name is Mouton. I'm CTO of drugs.com. I've been a professional developer for 20 years now. This is my first talk, and as you can tell by the slides, I'm definitely not a designer. My current role involves working in development, security, and operations. As a smallish company, let's say I wear many hats. I want to start off with a story of how I got into security. I started work during the dotcom bubble. It was an interesting time. We mostly focused on rushing work out. No one thought about security. Case in point, while I was working for a web agency, we had a client who we built a CMS for. One day, all their content was gone. Must be hackers, right? But after digging through the web logs, we found the culprit. Googlebot. It turns out there was a logic bug in the admin login. It didn't do any auth. Googlebot got into the admin and clicked all the links, including all the delete links for the CMS pages. So we didn't have OWASP top 10 back then, but as of today, this would have been classified as A2, broken authentication. As my career progressed, I moved companies and got my first taste of vulnerability reports, thanks to a service called HackerSafe, now called McAfee Secure. It was my job to review the vulnerabilities that got found by the automated service and fix them. I didn't understand much about why they were vulnerabilities or how they worked, just that I had to fix them. This is the usual disconnect between security and developers. Developers rely on security to find the vulnerabilities. Security often don't explain how they found the vulnerability in the first place. As a developer, you generally have a better understanding of the code base than a security professional. Usually security are looking for low-hanging fruit and don't understand all the application logic and code paths. You are in the best position to attack the application. It just takes a shift of mindset, and like most programming problems, it requires logic and knowledge. I made the jump into security after I went for a job interview. On my CV, I'd mentioned that I knew all about security. I mean, I could read the vulnerability report and patch code, therefore I was a security expert. As they started to ask specific questions about security, I realized how little I actually knew. I decided to up my game and actually learn about this security stuff. I took a couple of offensive security courses and started trying to break our own code. While I wouldn't classify myself as a security expert these days, I do okay. I spend quite a bit of time now digging through old code and looking for vulnerabilities. I consider myself now a code archaeologist. Here's a few examples of bugs that I found during my day-to-day, how I found them, and how I worked through to an exploit. It was reported back to our development team that a security scan had picked up a deserialization vulnerability. The scanner saw that the request variable was being fed into the PHP deserialize function, but couldn't give any more information or give a working example of an exploit. The development team saw this as a low priority compared to other development work, TPS reports, etc. But being a developer, I knew a little bit about the code base, so I went digging. I could see that it was decoding the base64 value from the request variable, and it was expecting certain keys from a deserialized array. Thanks to a talk by Hyperwired at KiwiCon 9, I knew this was something I could exploit. I went looking in the code base for objects that had vulnerable destruct or wake up magic PHP methods. I found a vulnerable method in the guzzle HTTP package, which was a dependency of another composer package. The cookie jar class wrote the cookie contents out to an arbitrary file location. This means I could write a PHP file somewhere in the web root and execute it on the web server. Time to start crafting the payload. I generated an array with keys that the original vulnerable code was expecting. I then added another key with a cookie jar object with the content and file path that I defined. Finally, I serialized it and base64 encoded it. Success. Now I could show that this vulnerability was exploitable, and I could get arbitrary file write and code execution. The development team then understood how serious this was and bumped up the schedule for fixing the bug. Another situation occurred when a front-end system was being tested for cross-site scripting. It showed no vulnerability, and the values being stored and reflected to the user were being sanitized. Good job, right? Once again, thanks to knowledge about the system, I knew that some of the values were also being displayed on an administrative view. Using a tool like XSS Hunter, I could prove that the data was vulnerable to blind cross-site scripting. The cross-site scripting was entered in the payload was entered in the front end and fired in the administrative view, and dumped out screenshots, the DOM, cookies, etc. for an admin user. So that's all very good, but how can I do that stuff too? I started off with a couple of courses on offensive security from a company called Not So Secure. But there are a few different courses around, and any exposure to actively exploiting web applications will help. Troy Hunt from Have I Been Pwned has a free course on Pluralsight called Hack Yourself First, which has already been mentioned this morning. Dan Wallace and Kevin Alcock have put together some step-by-step exercises at infosec101.nz. Once you have an understanding of some simple attacks, try applying them to your own code and projects. Think about how your application will handle it when somebody adds a single quote to a form field, or how it will display user-entered JavaScript tags. Can you upload files that the application isn't expecting? Does the application parse or deserialize any user input? If you're going to start trying live attacks, it's best to try it in an isolated environment, e.g. a developer sandbox, or somewhere that it doesn't matter where you drop tables, etc. If you don't have your own application, then there's a few applications designed to be insecure, such as the Damn Vulnerable Web Application and the OWASP Juice Shop project. I also find CTFs, or Capture the Flags, a great way to learn about exploits. They're essentially just a group of security problems, sometimes in a competition. And I participate in CTFs where possible. There are a lot of free CTFs available online from time to time. CTFs helped me realize how little I knew about exploiting systems. I could write a proof of concepts to show local file inclusions by reading etc password, or demonstrate an XSS vulnerability with script alert 1, but I struggled to use that vulnerability to do anything useful. Read write-ups from previous CTFs, especially ones you've tried and failed. You'll probably never get the same CTF problem twice, but at least you can follow the thought process of how to solve. Thank you.